Good day, everyone. I am Fagban Kende, and I am a data scientist at Syndro. Today, we'll be looking at the difference and differences between list and array. All right, so I'll be sharing a few tips on the similarities and the differences, and we're going to be looking at some use cases. All right, so of course, like I said, we'll be looking at what a list is, what array is, and we'll be looking at the similarities, differences, and of course, the most important thing, the practical example of an array and a list. All right, so um, similarities between a list and an array, both can be used to store data, and it is mutable. And by mutable, I mean the elements of an array or a list can be changed, right? So, and of course, slicing operation. So can be done on both list and array. So you can actually get the value of the element, probably like the range in the list or an array. So today we'll not be talking about the slicing operation and how to do slicing in list and array. We're just going to be checking the major differences between the list and array. So basically, this is why we are here. So, list can one of the difference between a list and an array is that a list can contain heterogeneous data types, and by heterogeneous I mean different data types. So, a list can contain a string, it can contain integer, float, and of course a boolean. So, an arrays only contain homogeneous data type, and by homogeneous I mean it basically contains the same data type. So it's either all its elements are just strings or they're just floats or they're just integers. I'm going to be showing us how that will be in our example. All right. So some operations cannot be done on a list, of course. You know, and I'm also going to be showing us how this, is when I'm using the Jupyter notebook. All right, so you can't perform some operations, some arithmetic operation on a list. For example, you can perform um, the addition or the multiplication or division operations on a list, even though the elements of the list is an integer or a float. You will not be able to perform such arithmetic operation. And of course, array operations can be done, on an array because of its same data type. So we'll just be moving straight to Jupyter Notebook. All right. So here we are. So of course, I've introduced myself. I'm going to be Kende. We'll be looking at the difference between a list and an array. Just before I start, I think it is very important for you to at least know a little about NumPy and how it operates. We'll not be looking at that in this tutorial. All right, so the first thing I did here was to import NumPy as NP, and we all know that NP is like a worldwide convention for the alias of NumPy. So that's why I'm using NP here. I'm just going to be running these cells, and then I'm going to be assigning A to this list. So basically, what I did here is to create a list with elements of 1 to string Raymond, Boolean, true, and 4.5 float. All right. So if I run this now, you can see this is the element we have. This is a list, and if I even check the type of this, so I'm just going to say what is the type of this list. All right. So if I do this, I should get a list. So you can see we have a list here. This is a list. All right, it's basically the same as what we are going to have. Okay, we have a list, right? And a list, like I said, can contain different elements of different data type, right? So you can see this is an integer, this is an integer, this is a string, this is a boolean, and of course, this is the float, right? So we can see when you check the type of this variable, you can see this is a list. All right, so arrays, right? Arrays, like we said in the PowerPoint slide, arrays, contain just a single data type. So this is how like an array is going to look like, containing the same data type. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? These are all integers, right? But of course, this here is still a list, right? Because of course this is how to write a list in Python. All right. So and just before I continue, for this theme in this type of theme in Anaconda, I'll be dropping a link in the I'll be dropping a link below to point to a video where you can change your Anaconda theme. Right, this is just basic and simple on how to change your Anaconda theme. All right, so a list. Now this is a list. Of course, if I run this, this is you can see we have the elements in the list. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I come here and do type of B, you can see I'm still going to get a list, right? Yes, I know this is a list. But of course, I'm trying to let us know that if we compare A and B, right, you can see A contains 1, 2, which is an integer, Raymond, which is a string, Boolean, which is true, and 4.5, which is a float, right? If we compare it to B, B just contains all integers, and this is how a typical array looks like, containing the same data type, right? So you can see here we have B, even though it's still a list, right? But we're just using this as an example to show you how an array is. So it's basically an array basically contains the same data type. So if we move to this, you can see this is still a list, right? If I run this, this is still a list because this is how to write a list in Python, right? Just using your open square square bracket, right? So you can see this list basically contains string or string. Of course, it's still a list. If you come and say you want to see the type of C, you're still going to get a list, all right? So if you do this, you're still going to get a list. But then this is just like how an array behaves. You have the same data type. Okay, so you have Raymond, you have Felix, yeah, and you have Stone. All right, probably these are names of people. All right, so you basically have the same data type, and here it is a string. All right, so it's still the same for this. It's just me trying to make us understand that arrays basically have the same data type as its element. So you can see true, false, false, true, and this, is all Boolean. All right, so if we run this, you can see this is what we have. All right, so that's it. All right, so if we have this, so you can see this is a float, so it contains float. All right, so if we run this again, you can see this is all float, right? So and if we check type E, and see it's a list, right? So now we want to actually convert a list to an array. So how do you convert a list to an array? So we're going to run this first and see. So this is an example of a list, right? So if we check this, we check the type, right? So if we check the type, we can see that this is what? This is a list. Now, how do you convert a list to an array? Now, of course, like I said, one of the prerequisites of this is to understand NumPy. So we're converting this list, which is of variable B, we named it as B, right, to an array. So what we're going to basically do is to use the mp.array method. All right, so you can see mp.array, then of course this is my list, and I've assigned it to array1. So that's the name of the variable holding my new array. All right, so if I run this, so you can see now when we can see the result. When we did this, it just gave us the list, right, with its elements. And when we did this, after converting to an array, this is what we have, right? So you can see this is basically what we have. This is an array. And when we check the type for array1, you can see that, of course, we now have a n-dimensional array. So you can see this. And when we check the type for a list, you can see we have a list. When we check that of an array, you can see what exactly we have, right? So I'm just going to be trying this for a few more examples. So I'm just going to just see. I remember when we had C and we check the type, it was a list. And of course, you can see the list contains just strings, right? So if we convert this to an array, so we're saying this should be array 2. So if we do this, you can see now we have arrays and we have all the elements of the list in an array. So this is just us, converting a list to an array. So if we check the type of the array2 variable, you can see what we have, that it is an n-dimensional array. All right, and for this, of course, we know that this is just a one-dimensional array. We will not be talking about dimensionality of an array in this tutorial. We're just going to be checking and explaining the difference between a list and an array. All right, so moving on to the arithmetic operations for a list and an array. Like I said in the slide, you can't perform arithmetic operations on a list. You can only perform that on an array. So, for example, if we run B again to check what B is. So B is a list. So if you want to confirm that, you can just, do this, type B, right? So you can see B is a list, right? With elements 1, 2, 3 to 5. All right. So remember we converted this list to an array. We did that before now. So I'm just going to run this again. And you can see I'm going to check the type of the array. So this, and then I'm going to say array1, right? So you can see this is an array and this is a list. So the same elements, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the element of this list called B. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the element of this array1, right? So now let's check how to do, let's divide our list by 2. So we want to divide individual elements by 2, and let's see what happens. So if I do this, B over 2, it should return an error. So you can see unsupported operand types. That means we cannot do an arithmetic operation on a list. This is a division operator, so we cannot do that on a list. So let's try for array1 and let's see the result. So if I run this, so you can see I have 0.1, I have 1, I have 1.5, I have 2, and I have 2.5. So basically, this is dividing each element by 2. You can say 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, 2 divided by 2 is 1.0, right? 3 divided by what? 2 is 1.5, 4 divided by 2 is 2.0, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Now, basically, because we're doing a division, this is going to convert this data type into float. All right, so going to this now, we can see this contain all floats, right? All floats. We have 20.4, 6.5, 12.1, and 2.5. All right, so if we check this and convert this to an array, so basically this command here is converting E, which is a list, to a numpy array. All right, so if we run this, you can see what we have here, right? You can see we have 20.4, the same element as the list, but this is just an array. All right, so like what we did the other time, let's see if we, divide again, or let's do a multiplication this time. So if we do a multiplication, let's see if we will have a result or an output. I know this for sure will give an error. Okay, so let's see. So okay, so okay, so you can see if we do a division, it's going to give an error, but if we do a multiplication, it's not going to work. You can see what this is doing, right? So you can see basically what this is doing is making this, is duplicating this basically. It's not giving us what we expect, right? So this is duplicating. So you can see 20.4, 6.5, 12.1 and 2.5, duplicating twice. So you can see this, right? But if we do, let's check this. We do array. So you can see this is our array, right? And if we do array 4 divided by 2, let's see what happens. So you can see this is actually doing what we want, right? It's dividing each element by 2, right? So you have 10.2. When you divide 20.4 by 2, you have 10.2. When you divide 6.5 by 2, you have 3.25. When you divide 12.1 by 2, you have 6.05. And when you divide 2.5 by 2, you have 1.25. All right. So you can see what this is basically doing here for the list is that it is, giving us the same value, right? Again, so you can see this is just repeating these values, this initial values twice, right? So you can see 20.4, you can see 6.5, 12.1, then again, and you can see from here, 2.5, then you can see 20.4, 6.5, 12.1, and 2.5. All right, so basically that is what is happening. So let's go to the next thing we're going to be talking about. So you can see a list, right? This is a list, right? So we're just going to check the type. This is the list, right? But remember I said we can actually convert a list to an array. So, and I said an array contains basically the same data type. So, but of course, here we have the integer, we have an integer, we have a string, we have a boolean, and then we have a float. If we convert this to an array, what happens? This is one of the major difference between a list and an array. So if you check this, if we do a conversion now, so basically what we're doing here, like you know already, is we're trying to convert the list A to an array named array3, right? So if we do this and we say array3, whoa, it has converted this list to an array. But an array is not supposed to have different data types, right? Yes, I know you're going to probably be thinking about that. All right, so if we, just to confirm, we want to check the type of this to be sure this is an array. So array3, right? So if I run this, whoa, so this is an array. So how come an array now have different data type? Now, one thing I need you to know here is that it's still the same data type. There is a conversion going on. All right, so if you take a close look at this, so if you take a close look at 1, 2, Raymond through 4.5, right? This is an integer, this is an integer, this is a string, this is a boolean, right? And this is a what? This is a float. Now, when you convert to an array, I want you to take note of this. This is now a string. Of course, you know that when you're converting an integer to a string, you can either do that by putting a quote, right? So you can see this a single quote, right? So you can see this is a string now. It's no longer an integer. This is a string. This is a string. Even the boolean is now a string, and of course, the float is now a string. So you can see that this thing contains the same data type. So you can see we have all strings here, right? So I'm going to be showing you something. So this is the hierarchy of data type in an array. So if you have a string, if you have a string in your, if you have a string in your as an element in your array, because it is the first on the hierarchy, it is basically going to be, it's going to convert all other elements to a string, right? And for example, if you have probably you do not have a string in any as one of your elements in an array, or you have a float, so it's going to convert both the integer and the boolean to the float data type. And of course, still the same rule. If you have an integer without a string and a float, or you have a boolean, it's automatically converts all the data types in that array to an integer. And of course, if you have a boolean type without string, float, or the integer, right, it's basically still retains the boolean data type for each of the elements in the array. So I'm going to go back to Jupyter Notebook and demonstrate that to us. All right, so basically, right, we can see here that it has converted everything to a string, right? So we're going to run this and do another thing. So if I run this cell, you can see, so I'm just going to check the type. So I'm just going to check the type and see F. So you can see this is still a list, right? So basically, we want to convert this list to a data type, to an array. All right, so we're going to be naming this array 5. So we name this array 5. So basically, if you notice something, now you can see we have 1 as an element, we have 3.5, we have true, which is a boolean, we have 7. So basically, we have 1, an integer, 3.5, float, true, a boolean, and 7, an integer, right? So if we, print out this f, which is a variable, so this is what we have, right? If we convert this to an array, notice, like I said, this hierarchy, right? So if you have a float, so you can see here we have a float, we have an integer, and we have a boolean, right? So if you come back here and see, okay, we have a float, we have an integer, and we have a boolean. So automatically, this is the topmost hierarchy here, right? Because we do not have a string in that example. So it's automatically going to convert all other things into a float. So it's going to convert an integer to a float. It's going to convert a boolean to a float. All right. So if you check this out, so of course we should know that true is the same as 1 and false is 0, right? So so if this is being converted, right? So you can see when we converted this list to an array, so you can see 1 now because we have 3.5, which is the float, and is the highest in the hierarchy without a string, right? So you can see 3.5, it's going to automatically convert the remaining element to a float. So you can see we have 1.0 here, we have 3.5, and of course true, which is 1, has been converted to what? 1.0. And of course 7 has been converted to what? 7.0. So you can see this automatically converts everything to a float. All right, so we're going to be taking another example. So if I run this cell, so basically this is a variable that contains a list, right? And the element of the list, are 1, true, and 100. So we have an integer, we have a boolean, and we have an integer. All right, so as you can see, 1, true, and 100. These are the elements of the list I just created. All right, so if we check the type of the list of G, we're going to see it's a list. All right, so, and of course, what we want to do here basically is to convert this list to an array. All right, and of course, like I said, we're going to be using the np.array method once again. All right, so, and I'm going to be naming this as array 6. All right, so if I do this, you can see 1, 1, 1. How come? Right? Yes, you remember the hierarchy. So we have integer and boolean. So integer comes first in the hierarchy. So it's going to convert all boolean values to an integer. So you can see here we have an integer, we have a boolean value, and we have another integer. So this does not contain a string, neither does it contain a float. So automatically it converts everything to an integer. All right, so when we convert these to an array, it takes 1, and of course 1 is an integer, and it takes true, and we know the equivalence of true for an integer is 1, right? So it converts that to an integer of 1, and of course 100 is converted to 100, which is still an integer, and that is how this still contains the same data type. All right, so if we look at this too, we're just going to do this. So basically, right, so if we, of course, we know this is an ND array, so n dimensional array, and of course we know this is 1. All right, this is a 1 dimension dimensional array. All right, so we have this, and the element of this list we're about to create contains just Boolean. We have the true, false, false, and the true. So if we run this and we check the data type, right? So if we do this, of course, we know this is a list. All right, so and then if we try to convert this to an array, see what we are going to have. We're still going to have true, true, false, false, and true because there is no other data type that has been specified here. So the highest level of data type that was specified here is just the Boolean. So we have the Boolean throughout, and that's why we still have our true, false, false, and true. All right, so that will be all, and I hope we understand now the major difference between a list and array. All right. Uh, Kindly give this video a thumbs up if that's helped you, and I'll be dropping the link to the video of how to change your uh, Anaconda theme, and of course the link to this file so you can get to download it. All right. See you next time, and have a great day.